Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the SERMAPod. This is the podcast for the Sports and Entertainment Risk Management Alliance. I'm the founder and CEO of SERMA, Rich Lenkov, also the host of the SERMAPod. And we have a repeat guest, Bryan Sullivan from Early Sullivan, Wright, Geiser, and McRae, joining us to talk about a new biopic that may bring with it some liability. Bryan, welcome back to our podcast.
Thanks for having me, Rich.
So the name of the biopic is The Apprentice, not to be confused with the TV show of the same name. This one is also about Donald Trump, but it depicts a young Donald Trump as an up-and-coming would-be real estate magnate in New York City, making his way. And it debuted at Cannes recently. It received a long-standing ovation. It recently got picked up, just yesterday, got picked up by a distributor. But it got the attention of Trump and his lawyers because it depicts Trump in not the greatest of light. Among the scenes depicted in this film, Bryan, are a long-standing rumor that Trump sexually assaulted his wife, Ivana Trump, his first wife. It also depicts him as having been dropped by his real estate mentor. So, first, what are and Trump through his team have called this, of course, lies. He has said that this garbage is pure fiction, which sensationalizes lies that have been long debunked. He, of course, references the Biden trials in this statement. So, first, what is the potential liability of these filmmakers?
It's going to be difficult to ding them with liability. There have been cases in the past. In the recent past, there was the TV show The Feud on FX depicting Olivia de Havilland. She actually sued over that for false light, defamation, and that was dismissed early on an anti-SLAPP motion because the court recognized that, there are, the doctrine or concept literary license. And as long as there's a reasonable basis for the scene, it's not defamation because the film acknowledges, they're saying it's a biopic, not a biography. They're not saying that every single thing happened word for word. They're saying that this is based on events that have been disclosed in the public, which in the case of Ivana Trump, under oath, she submitted statements that she was raped in their divorce proceedings. That's where that came from. She recanted it 40 years later or 30 years later, something like that. So basically what she's saying, which do you believe? The original statement under oath or the recantation of that statement, which was not under oath? There is a reasonable basis for having such a scene in there because there is a public allegation that occurred. Similarly, with dropping from the real estate, there is statements in the news from that time period about that falling out. There are documentations that something like that occurred, and they're basing the movie on that information that's in the public domain.
So let's break that down for a second because you've said a lot and very interesting stuff. Some of our listeners are not totally, and our viewers might not be totally up to speed on some of these IP issues. So you mentioned defamation. What is defamation? How might it apply in this kind of situation?
It's a knowingly or reckless statement of falsity. Okay. So you actually have to either know that the statement is false or engage in such reckless conduct that the statement is false. The example I usually use is saying someone's a pedophile. That has a certain definition. I believe there was, this came up specifically several years ago with the Alabama Senate candidate, Roy Moore, who was accused of, being like 30 and trying to have sex with 16-year-olds. And people were calling him a pedophile. And pedophile has a specific definition of prepubescent, and 16 is not. So it has to be a false statement and a reckless one. But that was found not to be defamation because it's so close that everybody kind of knows if you're going after underage kids, pedophile is a general term. In the case of Donald Trump, or this biopic, the false statement Trump is saying is false is that he raped his wife, Ivana. but there is an allegation in the public record under oath that can be relied on. So they're not engaging in reckless behavior. They have a documentation that supports that scene in the film. And just because she recanted in a non under oath statement many years later doesn't mean that it's true. The recantation is true. So the filmmakers are entitled to rely on what is in the public domain.
And you also reference, thank you for that explanation. You also reference anti-SLAPP statutes. What is that, and how might that apply here?
That is it's basically an early attack on the pleadings, and it requires the plaintiff to come forward with evidence, with some evidence. You don't have to have all your evidence, but you have to have some evidence. In legal parlance, the phrase is a scintilla of evidence supporting each element of each cause of action that you're bringing. So if Donald Trump were to sue the film, they would come forward with, well, here's the evidence. They would bring this motion to dismiss the complaint and show that, and force Trump to show that he has evidence supporting each one of his claims at an early stage, not just allegations, which is how it's normally done, but actual evidence. And they then can present their own evidence of a defense. So in their case, truth is a complete defense. They could present evidence. Here's an under oath statement from Ivana from the New York divorce case. Here are newspaper articles that, reported on this that we can rely on under the law in making a movie. And I guarantee you that they have some sort of disclaimer. I haven't seen the movie, but I would be shocked if they did not have a general disclaimer that, that this film is while based on events reported in real life, is a work of fiction because nobody knows what actually was said. And they would have that disclaimer there.
Now, Bryan, Trump is obviously a public figure, perhaps one of the 5 most public figures in the history of our planet, right? That brings with it a different standard. Explain that.
Yes, that brings the actual malice standard, which is a very high burden. And being a public figure, there is much more that can be said about the person. And so they have to engage with actual knowledge that what they were doing was completely false. Now, I go back to my example of a pedophile accusation because it's very serious, but 2, it is actually a very defined term. So if they had something in the movie about Trump being a pedophile, that has never been reported, never been alleged against Trump. No facts at all that I am aware of that have ever supported that. So that might be more actionable for Trump because there's nothing in the public domain that supports such an allegation. But in the case of the scene where the character of Trump rapes Ivana, that is in the public domain. It doesn't matter that it was recanted. It still is based on an under oath statement and allegation that have happened. So that's the difference for a person that's the example I use to show the difference between a public person and non-public person. It has to be so categorically false and outrageous that the reason you're doing it is because you just hate him and just want to go after that person.
Now, Bryan, the precedent of New York Times versus Sullivan is often cited in these type of cases. What is that case, and why is it relevant here?
That's the case that established the actual malice standard. My partner recently challenged it in a Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal case because the belief is, and many believe in modern times, the actual malice standard is too high of a burden in these days of social media and instant communication. But that's what set forth the actual malice, that if you are a public person, and Trump is clearly a public person, the standard for actually imposing liability for defamation is extremely high. It's different for someone like you or me that are just everyday people out there.
Bryan, we know that in this country, anyone could sue anyone for anything, and frequently you could even survive a motion for summary judgment on a liability issue. But then you got to prove damages, right? You got to prove that you were affected some way, economically or otherwise harmed by the by the alleged damage. In this case, Trump is uniquely positioned as someone who, is Teflon, right? I mean,
Yeah.
someone who says they could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, someone who admits to grabbing women by the genitalia. I mean, you could go on and on. It would
Someone who's been found to have raped,
exactly
sexually assaulted, not raped, I apologize, sexually assaulted a woman in Bergdorf's.
right. So, given all that and the laundry list of other similar harms to Trump's reputation, it would be difficult in a trial to prove to a jury that your reputation was damaged as a result of, these allegations in The Apprentice.
It it would be difficult, not impossible, because you can come up with arguments, but there is a standard. For example, I go back to the pedophile claim. If that was a claim, probably much easier to get damages because it is such a heinous crime. Rape is heinous, but he's already been found to have committed sexual assault. So, or let's say that he was accused of I trying to think of an outlandish example, but let's say he was accused of trying to break half the country apart and form Trump land. That hasn't happened that we're aware of, but that would be something that would be easier for damages. But because he's already been accused of it multiple times, found liable of the same conduct multiple times, twice he's been found liable for it, the damages are a lot harder to prove. And that is very common in defamation cases, even for the average person. How do you quantify embarrassment? I'll use a famous defamation case as an example, the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case. Johnny Depp could point to 2 film roles that, based on his prior income for similar roles, he apparently did not get because of Amber Heard's allegations. That is a much easier case of damages. I was about to sign this contract, the allegations hit, and they said we're not going to agree to this anymore because of those allegations. That's a very easy way to get damages. Otherwise, it's very difficult in defamation, no matter what.
So, Bryan, you obviously do a lot of work in the space. You have for years. You're one of the preeminent lawyers in this field in this country. My question to you is, Trump isn't shy about litigation. We know that he's not shy about hiring lawyers, filing lawsuits frequently that are dismissed, frequently that have no merit. Even though he doesn't pay a lot of his lawyers, he continues to be able to retain them. What kind of chilling effect does the even threat of a lawsuit have on, admittedly, a small film? This is not a big film, doesn't have a big budget, was struggling to find a distributor. The filmmaker came out and said, I stand by our film and I'd like to actually show it to Trump and have a discussion with him. But it can have a chilling effect on the expression of, free speech. Just the threat of Trump and all his resources coming after you, right?
Yes, it can have a chilling effect, and that was the goal of an anti-SLAPP motion, why they passed it, so that people who have a large amount of money have to put up all their elements at an early stage, so that they can't drag litigation out against a smaller person for exercising their First Amendment rights. However, in this day and age, that motion is still very expensive. But and the bigger issue that they would have is the threat of an injunction. But I have seen in these sorts of films where they have a litigation reserve to fight that. They all the money that comes in will go into the litigation reserve. And actually, it's a small budget movie, but Sebastian Stan is a high level actor. He's in the Marvel movies and has done phenomenal performances in other movies as well. So they may be able to use this notoriety to do a crowdfunding raise to defend it, or to take other actions, and people will now want to see it. And you're upping the money that is going to be paid for the movie by a streamer to get exclusive rights to it.
Yeah, I mean, the woman who plays Ivana is an Oscar nominee. Last question, Bryan, is when you have a film like this, you raise a really excellent point, and we counsel a lot of our clients, and I talk to a lot of folks about this topic in general. I think it's a really underrated part of any filmmaker's budget to consider the legal fund. You mentioned the legal fund. I'm a producer myself. I produce some films, and I tell people all the time. I spoke at Sundance about this recently. You never put enough money in the insurance and the legal bucket, because hopefully you won't have that. But I have to believe that the filmmakers went into this film from day one knowing that they had to put enough money in reserve because you're dealing with Trump. There's no question you're going to get sued. So it's important, as you know, to have great insurance. Like one of the first things that you should do as a filmmaker, in my opinion, is get the best insurance you can, hire the best lawyers you can, because you might get that knock on the door with that summons, and you don't want to be looking for it then.
I can't stress what you just said enough.
And
But
it's not a
what
commercial, by
is
the way. It's not a commercial for us. I mean,
no?
but it's true. I mean, the best friend of a young filmmaker is like your broker and your lawyer.
They and filmmakers are such creative people. They don't look at it that way at all. And in fact, if you look at the legal budgets for the quote production legal, it's the lowest line item in the film budget. I have done favors for friends and have done that, and it is awful. And you're treated like you're just a stenographer to change agreements, and they'll sign stuff without you approving it, and you're like, what? You're missing key terms here. And then they go to delivery and they can't deliver the film. But I have been part of several high profile litigations. There was one years ago over Mr. Holmes with Ian McKellen, where the estate of Arthur Conan Doyle sued. By the way, they have a reputation for suing anybody, even though Sherlock Holmes is in the public domain.
Right.
But we had a litigation budget as part of that. Anytime there's a lawsuit, the distributor will be smart enough to have a litigation budget that hopefully will be liquidated because it either settles quickly or never is filed. But that is definitely one of the key things. The other thing that I've seen that people do is they sue first. And I'm like, why are you suing first? You have insurance. Wait to be sued and let the insurance pay for the defense.
For sure. Great advice from Bryan Sullivan from Early Sullivan. Great topic. Very interesting. Please come back and update us on this and other stories. Appreciate you being on the SERMAPod.
Thank you, Rich.